so many people are talking about panic, right? But it's like, when you're thinking about fear, it's not like it's only a problem in one direction, right? Too little fear is just as bad as too much fear. In some situations, it's much worse.
Right.
But the thing about fear, from my perspective as a teacher of movement, is you never want to get rid of fear, right? If you get rid of fear completely, you set yourself up to die very quickly.
You're turning off the alarm.
Yeah. What you want is to not let fear drive behavior without regard to your other systems.
Right.
Panic is when the only thing that's driving you is fear.
Right.
The earlier you react, the earlier that you recognize the thing that is fearful, the better you can integrate it with your rational system. And then you don't have to go through so much anxiety, right? You're not highly anxious right now because you panicked early. I mean, panic is the wrong word for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's like a semantic to this. Like, it seems like panic has different connotations to different people. The ones that hate it think of the Molotov cocktails and think where fear is the only driving factor. The ones that say that we should panic early are like you and me, where it's like, use that fear to drive action, positively, so you can, do something about it. That most people will be like, why are you doing this? That's at least what I'm considering panic. I'm considering, like, you see the fear, you see the unknown that's very dangerous, and you take action, and other people are going to look at you and be like, why are you doing this? It seems stupid. Like, I bought a mask on January 20th or something like that. Before it was like 400 cases in Wuhan. I have goggles, I have gloves, I have all that. I got all that really early, right? So I never got into one where I know they're all sold out now. I also got them from parents. But like, it's, people might question why you're doing that, but it's not like violent or Molotov cocktails or just like purely fear driven. It's more like, okay, I see some danger, so I'm going to do things that may seem like you don't need to do this. It's more like, why are you doing something you don't need to do right now?
Yeah.
That's what I consider good panic early.
Welcome to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast, where we bring you the most interesting and enlightening conversations around movement practice and how you can become the most heroic version of yourself through pursuing movement that's relevant to your nature. This is a podcast that's going to feature some of the top movers in the world, some of the most amazing movement thinkers, and people from fields that are related to movement as far afield as evolutionary theory, strength and conditioning, and everything in between. So if you're interested in movement, please stick around. And if you like our work and want to support it, please consider supporting us on Patreon, because this podcast is completely listener supported. We don't want to take any advertising. We don't want to interrupt your experience of watching the show. So what really helps us get the best thinkers on, have the time to put these together, have the best quality for you guys as far as audio and video, is your support. So please consider supporting us and enjoy the rest of the show.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. Today our guest is Erich Lin. We just had Erich Lin on a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to dive deep into some of the risk, how we think about risk, because I'm still seeing so many people in my feed who really don't understand effective thinking around risk and what exponential problems look like, what the second order effects of them are. And I see people who are fairly sophisticated around this stuff throwing around these words like fat tails and, second order effects and multiplicative problems. But a lot of times the people they're trying to reach don't actually understand those, right? I don't think that I perfectly understand them. I think I have a decent and intuitive grasp of that. So I wanted to work through my own understanding of this with someone who is a bit more sophisticated in the maths and had dived deep into the thinking of Nassim Taleb and others like him. And so I invited Erich Lin back on. I thought this conversation went really well. I'm very excited. I think that, for people trying to understand what's happening with coronavirus, this will be very enlightening, and it will help you not only understand coronavirus, but will help you understand a lot of other systemic risks and how we can think about behaving in that. So I think it integrated some really interesting things. So enjoy. Without further ado, Erich Lin. Erich, it's good to have you back. I'm excited to have this conversation about coronavirus specifically, and really disappointingly frequent errors in the way that people are thinking about this. So I'm going to just start with, why is this not the flu, right? Like currently 100,000 people are dead of the flu. It's like 14,000 people are dead of coronavirus. So lots of people are like, we're overreacting to this, this isn't that big of a threat. Why is that the wrong level to focus on, and what's being missed there?
Yeah, so my thoughts on that are, it's basically like the seasonal flu, similar to like car accidents and stuff. We kind of understand their distribution more, their like variants. So for example, it's easy to highlight with the car accidents, but say there are, I don't know how many car accidents there are, like 10 million or something like that, let's say. Maybe it's less, maybe it's way more, I don't know. But the point is, it's not going to become, now the next year, it won't have so many car accidents that you'll have more than the last 10 years combined, right?
Yeah.
With COVID-19, the next day, you can have more cases than the last 10 combined. And we've seen that, right? Like you can have more deaths than the last 3 weeks combined, or the first 3 weeks combined, maybe not last three. So that it's multiplicative in that aspect where the variance creates volatility in the number of cases you'll see that can make it way more than what you would have thought. And the seasonal flu is kind of something that we've seen many years now, and we kind of know its variance enough to build the hospital capacity to handle that, right?
Yeah.
Now you add on the COVID-19, and we haven't built the variance of our hospital capacity to handle that variance, right? So like that's where the danger, I think, comes from. Even if COVID-19 was, say, slightly more dangerous than the flu, our hospital capacity can't handle that variance in the number of people that need to go to the hospital, right?
I'm seeing a lot of people getting hung up on the uncertainty around the case fatality rate or the infected fatality rate, right? They seem to be thinking, if it's true that the case fatality rate is wrongly calculated, right? And in fact, there's way more people infected, and this is actually saying no more deadly than the flu, that would mean that we shouldn't be worried about it.
Right.
And this seems like the wrong way to think about it, because there's two key things here. One is we have uncertainty around what that number is, right? So we have, one study that says, that the case fatality rate, once you control for the infected but asymptomatic, might be as low as 0.1%, right around the same as flu. And then we have another that says, no, it's 0.94, so it's 9 times the flu. And then we have some that say, the WHO study says there's basically no asymptomatic. There's no asymptomatic people, and then in fact it's 3.4, or that number is uncertain, right? We really don't know what it is. We also know that it's variable, right? That the case fatality rate changes dramatically based on what the healthcare available is.
Right.
But before we even know that number, we know that we need to be worried.
Exactly.
Because we know that it already did something in Wuhan, right?
Right.
Like, this is what I keep trying to point people to, is there's an empirical observation. The first thing that matters about the coronavirus is just that we know that it has the capacity to overwhelm the healthcare system.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
I see a lot of people who are sort of like doing, they're doing their numbers, right? They're running some numbers. They're getting locked into some set of numbers, some model. And then they just sort of ignore the most relevant evidence, because it's not perfectly numerical, right? But they can go play with their figures. And in our last interview, I think we talked about like a naive empiricism. I think there's people failing to think about fat tails, and people feeling like if they can make the numbers look like a model that makes them comfortable, that is somehow meaningful at this stage.
Right.
So to tell me a little bit about what your response is to that kind of thinking.
Yeah, so a few things to touch on that. First, like you were saying, the case fatality rate, right? Like there are a lot of confounding variables at play. Like one can be, the number of people that are to die, we still don't know because they're still recovering, or maybe not recovering, but like, they're in the ICU, right?
Still in the course of the disease.
Exactly, still in the course of the disease. So you can say that can increase it, but then you can say it could decrease it because maybe there are people that were infected that never went to the hospital, right? And then you can say, well, technically the case fatality rate for some people that are being reported are like, oh, it was from this disease, not COVID-19. So the cause of disease also, right? Not to mention, we also need to look at the true death rate responsible from COVID-19, not only physically, but like overwhelming the hospital, like people that could have gotten treated now won't be, or depression and suicide resulting from unemployment in the economic sector, right? There's an exponential, fan out resulting from this, right? So that's one. In terms of other things you have to look at beyond the first order, right? The other thing is when you model, let's even say that people that do model think it is a fat tail. Like even at that point, trying to model a fat tail is like people that do this for a living know that that's, an extremely high sensitivity error. Basically, you change one variable by like a decimal point, you can get like 1,000 times more of something. Like the sensitivity to error changes the result greatly. So it's kind of foolish to try to model some of these things. But like what you were saying, you can look at, kind of more like observational evidence, like more like directly, you can see what's happening, right? Like with Wuhan.
Empirical observation, right?
Sure, yeah. Like with Wuhan, we saw that, they were like cremating bodies like way more than they normally do, like at 10x capacity. We saw that hospitals were overwhelmed purely by the fact that they were building new hospitals, right? We saw the extent of their lockdown, like people basically can't leave their house, period. It's not like a shelter-in we had. And even after they did that, it started slowing down, whether we can believe their numbers or not, but it was still like, spreading, right? Until now, like it's really slowed down. And then we saw the same thing happen in Italy. Now their hospitals are being overwhelmed, right? And we're not far behind. So it's like, yes, you can model all you want, but like the sensitivity to error is gonna be so great that like you won't truly know. So my thought is, from the very beginning, if you know something is, and this comes from Taleb, but like if something is high impact, like deaths or like related with your finance, and it's something that is kind of like a tail event that you just don't know how bad it can, like how explosive it can be, right? Like it, from one model it might just be like, oh, only 100 deaths. From another model it could be like 1,000,000 deaths. That's kind of like the tail, right? Like in a normal distribution, a tail may say like, oh, there's only a 1%, like 0.0001% possibility of 1,000,000 deaths. But in another model, we use a tail, it's like 5% possibility of 1,000,000 deaths. Then like that's a significant change, right? Depending on the exponent, the power law, like it can become even more. In those cases, it can be explosive. It's fat tail. It's multiplicative, and it's high impact because a lot of people can die. The economy could be affected, and stuff like that. You don't really need anything more than that to make a decision, right? On January 26th, Taleb and like 3 other people like had a paper that basically said we had to do something draconian about this, or we're going to suffer. Like every day we wait, the impact to the economy and everyone will be exponential, or like some large amount that we don't understand. It's nonlinear, convex, right? And that's happening. Like we should have, heeded that warning. Even like this Hong Kong doctor was saying, like in the past, because they dealt with SARS and stuff, like we need to do something draconian. Like we need to stop all the airlines and stuff.
I want to stop for a second. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think a lot of people like they don't have good models in their mind for what a fat tail distribution is, or power law distribution versus a normal distribution, or like what a multiplicative problem is. So, you know, when we start throwing around these words, a lot of times it just sort of blows past people, right? And
Right.
people like last time we talked, there was this idea of extremistan, right, and mediocristan, right? So mediocre stand. So we can say flu, for instance, is mediocre stand, or diabetes, or all these things, right? We have enough experience of them that we know roughly how they'll distribute themselves over the year. And we don't expect there to be a massive variability in that. So, you can look at a curve of flu deaths over the course of a year, right? And there's going to be a peak at some point, and it's going to tail off, right? And then you could look at a curve of flu deaths across years, right? And you get a relatively normal distribution of what flus look like from one year to another if you're looking just at influenza. So you're going to say that in most years, I think that the variation in this country from year to year, if I remember correctly, it's like, what is it? I think it's like between 20 to 60,000 people die per year, right, in this country. So what we can expect is that, a small percentage of years are going to be 20,000, a small percentage of years are going to be 60,000, and most years are going to be, say, 40,000.
Right.
So that's going to be a relatively normal distribution. And I think that we all kind of assume that most things will behave that way, right?
Right.
So when we see something like COVID-19, our brain jumps to, what is the closest thing I can model this to? Flu. And how does flu behave? Oh, even if this is a bad flu year, so what, right? The 1% worst flu year, still not that big of a deal.
Right.
So now, but if we look at pandemics in general, they're not shaped like a Gaussian's curve, right?
Right.
So, what percentage of all the deaths from flu or respiratory illnesses in the 20th century was caused by the Spanish flu, for instance? Like quite a lot. I don't think it's an 80-20 thing or anything like that, but it's a big percentage, right? It's a tail event.
Right.
So the other distribution that most people aren't aware of is the Pareto distribution, or the power law distribution. So we have, the classic 80-20 rule. 20% causes 80%. So you, instead of a curve that looks like this, you have a curve that looks like that.
Right.
And just tell me if I'm getting this wrong, because you're the math guy. But
I can interrupt there a little bit. So like normal distribution is basically similar to basically flipping a coin. 50% of the time it'll go heads, 50% of the time it'll go tails.
Yeah.
And if you flip a coin 100 times, the very center will be 50 heads, 50 tails. Mm-hmm. And the farthest to the left will be 100 heads, and farthest to the right will be 100 tails. Mm-hmm. And you kind of map it out from that. And that's also known as a random walk, or Gaussian, or Brownian. Mm-hmm. It has many names. Now, there are many other distributions. Pareto's one, student T. There's like a lot of these type of distributions. And when the distribution has a tail that's fatter, meaning the chance of getting 100 heads is higher than a normal distribution, it's called like a fat tail, right? Or a thicker tail. In those distributions, those one-off events happen at a greater probability. Now, Taleb has I'm not sure if this was in the technical part of the black swan or not, but like he talks about a distinction between a gray swan and a black swan. So gray swan is where we kind of know the distribution, but it's a thicker tail.
Sure.
And in those cases, you may have your center here, and that's most likely what's going to happen. But sometimes you'll get these crazy events that you don't expect, and we've seen that with the flu sometimes. So I'm not positive what Taleb would say, but I think he'll call the seasonal flu maybe a gray swan event, where there's a thicker tail, and hospitals are ready for that thicker tail based on their models, but we kind of know the distribution. So in those events, we kind of know what's going to happen. The danger with a pandemic virus, like a zoonotic one, like COVID-19, where it came from an animal, is we know somewhat that's a fat tail thing, because it's a multiplicative thing, right? R0 by definition is multiplicative. Basically, you take one person, infect 3 other people, infect 3 other people, that's multiplicative. You know that's how viruses work, right?
Function.
Exactly. So like in those cases, you know that it's multiplying, meaning that's probably going to be some sort of fatter tail than normal distribution, because the extremes are more likely to happen when you're multiplying. In those cases, because we've never seen it before, it's not really going to be a gray swan. We don't know the distribution as well. So it becomes more of a blacker swan, if you will. And that's where it becomes dangerous, because we know that when something is multiplicative, the tails can have a high sensitivity error, where it can go from 1 out of a billion to 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 3, right? Like it's we don't know how much that modulates, and that's where that variance in the variance itself is dangerous. So kind of having the distinction between a typical Gaussian, which like we know it's centered, right? Like humans are very Gaussian. They're always going to be, within 4 feet and 9 feet tall, right? You're not going to have one human that's taller than 100 people.
Yeah.
But you may have a flu season that will be, 3 or 4 floor seasons combined or something like that. And that's the gray swan aspect of it. But we still know it enough to model and get things ready.
Well, flu has a flatter curve than human height, but it's still a curve that we are relatively aware of. Whereas we really don't know what the curve, the tail size of COVID, right? Like
exactly.
What is the variation of how bad it could be?
Right. And our hospitals aren't prepared for that variation. It's prepared for kind of the gray swan variation that we can get from the seasonal flu. And that's where the danger kind of lies.
Yeah. One thing.
And continue.
One thing that you're seeing a lot of like very intelligent people sort of their response to this is since there's been a big response, especially you're starting to see more and more people who are relatively statistically literate, relatively, I say, who are interesting thinkers in other domains, who are coming out and saying, maybe we're overreacting to this. Maybe we're overreacting to this. We need more information. Like Ioannidis, who's a thinker who's made some great works in pointing out the replication crisis in psychology and throughout the sciences. He's come out and had this paper basically saying we need more information. There's an error there, right? Because of the asymmetry of risk of, what you get from getting more information versus what you get.
Exactly.
There's not, if you don't react at a low enough information.
Exactly.
So go ahead and explain that a little bit, like why that asymmetry is so important.
I'd love to touch on that. So it's kind of related to our actually former podcast where we talked about how Bayesian thinking is a really good form of thinking, particularly in mediocre worlds. It's more dangerous in situations where, kind of like you were saying, like you need to make that decision, otherwise it's going to get much worse. So like Taleb uses the analogy of a bear and a stone. Like, are you going to mistake a bear for a stone or a stone for a bear, right? Like you're going to always think it's a bear so you don't die, because the moment you make the mistake of trying to get more information, you're dead. And then you don't have what's called long-term probability. So a lot of Bayesian thinking is, I find that common among math-based, engineer-based people, because they want the data. So in terms of acquiring the data, it's perfectly fine. And Bayesian thinking is perfectly fine if the environment you're in is ergodic, which basically means that there's no way you're going to die. There's no way you're going to lose all your money. You can run it long term so that eventually you hit the truth.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
It completely works. The thing is, when you're in an environment that's non-ergodic, where there's like an absorbing barrier that'll kill you or destroy all your wealth, you're not going to be able to hit the long term before you converge to the actual truth. So the thing is, like you were mentioning with the asymmetry of getting more information and the risk you take to try to get that more information, by the time you try to catch up with the data, you may have already been, dead, or like the economy may have been affected due to hospitals being overwhelmed and people staying home, right? So like trying to get that information it could actually hurt you. Whereas if you know that you take a more simpler, like, bear versus stone, or just ask a grandma approach. Well, if there's something that you don't understand, that's multiplicative. You don't know the distribution yet, and we know that there is a high impact because in this case it kills you. Trying to wait for that information is dangerous. So we can take this is when the only time you apply the precautionary principle, which is when you have a multiplicative process that's unknown and it's high impact. You would not apply the precautionary principle in a media Christian world, right? You wouldn't apply the precautionary principle where Bayesian principles apply. But in a world where you can lose all your money, where you can die, where the engineer is not used to the usual data mining world, that's where precautionary principle applies. And that's where you can't necessarily apply. You can apply Bayesian as like if you were God and you have 1 million years to wait, and that doesn't matter, right? Then yeah, it works. That's totally fine. But yeah, not when a high impact risk is running faster than you can apply your data.
So it's interesting. I think my thinking in this area has been quite Bayesian, right? As I've gone through the process of trying to recognize what's going on with COVID, I've been using a sort of Bayesian process. I think that what made me concerned earlier was, one, Taleb is one of my priors, right? So I have a set of priors to pull off of.
Right.
And two, I've read a lot of history, and so I know how
about
pandemics have been major issues in human lives.
Right.
So what I'm seeing from a lot of people, to me, looks like a kind of naive Bayesianism, right? They don't have a sufficiently wide prior set to get any value out of it. But even myself, right? Like I could see that there was this exponential process going on, but I was waiting for indicators for when to react.
Right.
Which I think is a mistake, right? In retrospect, I should have been reacting much earlier, and recognizing that the thing that I was looking at needed to be treated in a different way.
Right.
Treated in the extremistan model would have gotten me further ahead in reacting to this.
Yeah. I'd like to touch on that. It's like, so let's pretend that you didn't have Taleb and you didn't have the Spanish flu, or aptly named only because Spain was the only one reporting that data. But like, let's say you didn't have that information. I'm just filling the water. Okay, thank you. If you didn't have that information, then you may be like in that boat where you're seeking information slower than the risk is killing people, right? So like it's fortunate that we have, it's like take the financial markets, for example. If we'd never seen a crash before, everyone would think it would be in good times, right? And what's happened since 2008 is we've been in good times so long that everyone's forgotten what happened in 2008. They're either too young, they haven't read the history books, whatever, right? Now, some people have a better, memory effect in remembering or just reading, right? Like you. Some people don't. Well, some people just never seen the event before, like pretend we are in 1917, right? In those cases, it's just you don't have your Bayesian priors to inform you, and it becomes dangerous to try to chase that data while the risk is going faster than you can chase the data. So I think in those cases, that's where it may be better to apply precautionary principle over Bayesian principles. But yeah, you're right. Like if this seems similar to something that you've seen as a Bayesian before, then yeah, you would have applied precautionary principle based on the fact that the pandemic of 1918 wiped out, I don't know, 5% of the world? I don't remember. It infected 30%.
Well, we actually don't know precisely because there's a lot of third world countries that didn't have.
Right.
But I believe that it's about 40 million people. It's approximately the same amount of people as died in World War II.
Jesus, yeah.
And that was in a much smaller world, right? Like I think that there's 2 billion people or something in the world at that point.
Right.
So we're, if we had the same scale of event now, with almost 7.7 billion people,
I'm talking hundreds of millions dead.
Millions. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Which I think it's totally plausible that if we don't behave effectively towards COVID, that's the type of event we're looking at.
Right. I actually have some thoughts on how we behave towards, but we can finish other things first.
Yeah. So let's talk about second order effects. This is something that I think most of the people who are taking the no, let's not overreact, don't seem to be thinking about effectively. I was thinking about this, and there was a paper that I read that basically modeled a suppress and then try to kind of hold it off.
Imperial College paper?
Not the Imperial College paper. This is a different one. This was actually not a paper, like a blog post. But it was called flattening the curve is a dangerous delusion was the name of it. We'll put that in the show notes. But actually, no, it wasn't this one. It was another one. But anyways, I can't remember it. But basically, he did a mathematical model. And of course, we've already talked about how these models have to be treated with a great deal of distrust.
They're great marketing, though. So I'm okay with using for marketing if we need to convince people to act. Yeah. I'm not okay with modeling if we need to tell people like, hey, this. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the sensitivity is you can get a lot, but basically he came up with it'll cost us about $3 trillion for the U.S. economy to suppress this thing completely. If we let it play out, right, and just didn't react at all, it would cost about $14 trillion. And if we suppress the R naught to about 1.5, it would cost us about $7 trillion. Interestingly, if the R naught is anywhere between like 1 and 1.5, the cost is actually much higher. So there's like two
waves
minimums. But so yes, so the lowest cost is complete suppression, right? The medium cost is flattening the curve, but it's still an extraordinarily high cost. But the thing is that I think when people look at those, they don't think about the error bars on those, right? And my intuition, and I'm not as sophisticated with the math as you are, is that the error bar on the uncontrolled model and on the flattening the curve model is much larger than the error bar on the suppression model, because the more people who are infected, the more systems that this impacts, the more potential second order effects that we're going to have. And that's that multiplicative risk that we're talking about. So we're saying, maybe it's 3 trillion plus or minus a trillion over here, and it's 7 trillion plus or minus 5 trillion over here. It's 14 trillion plus or minus 10 trillion over here.
Right.
And so that's because, how many people die? Like, I don't see anybody talking about how many people are going to die because they don't have access to care. Like, because I've started talking about this, I have people who are followers of mine from Italy sending me messages and saying, my mom has cancer and she can't get access to chemotherapy right now.
Oh shit. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I figured that was the case, but
yeah, or
firsthand,
I broke my ankle doing parkour and now I no longer have access to a physical therapist.
Oh shit.
Right? For the duration of this. So those are the second order effects. So let's talk about like the distinction between first order effects and second order effects, and why something like COVID-19 has a lot more potential to have these second order effects than something like influenza or diabetes or heart disease.
Yeah, I think that's a great topic to broach. So first, I think your intuition is correct. So like you said, it's easier to understand. There's error bars in this entire model because we don't understand the distribution yet, right? And we understand distribution's fat tail, so we know the error bars are high. So when you're looking at like, pure suppression, where you can try to model like, the impact to the economy from that, the error bar is going to probably be lower because most of the effects will be coming from first order, less so from second order because hospitals are like less likely to get overwhelmed and stuff like that, right? When you start doing, more relaxed methods, where it's not just suppression, where it's less than suppression, where we let people roam freely, then the second order effects become more pronounced, and then you get essentially that explosion, right? So would you like me to read that billiard ball thing? I kind of want to read that to the audience. It's up to you.
Go right ahead.
And let me pull this up. Billiard ball. I think you enjoyed that one. This kind of illustrates first, second, third order effects.
That problem before. Peterson and Vervaeke call that the combinatorial explosion problem.
Aptly named.
Right. So like the example that I've given, which I get from Vervaeke, is chess, right? So in chess, there's an average of 64 moves per game and 30 illegal moves per turn, which means that the amount of pathways for a chess game is 30 to the 64,
right.
Which is
massive.
It's on the same order of magnitude as the number of electrons in the universe.
Right. That's totally fair. So the billiard ball analogy kind of illustrates it very nicely for first, second order, third order, because it talks about taking a billiard. I'll read it actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's from a mathematician named Michael Berry. If you know a set of basic parameters concerning the ball at rest, can compute the resistance of the table, which is quite elementary, and can gauge the strength of the impact, then it is rather easy to predict what will happen at the first hit. The second impact becomes more complicated but possible. You need to be more careful about your knowledge of the initial states, and more precision is called for, meaning the error bars. You need more fine tuning of your initial assumptions. The problem is that to correctly compute the ninth impact, this will be like ninth order, you need to take into account the gravitational pull of someone staying next to the table. Modestly, Berry's computation uses a weight of less than 150 pounds. And to compute the 56th impact, every single elementary particle of the universe needs to be present in your assumptions. Otherwise, you'll have too much of an error bar. An electron at the edge of the universe, separated from us by 10 billion light years, must figure into the calculations since it exerts a meaningful effect on the outcome. Now, consider the additional burden of having to incorporate predictions about where these variables will be in the future. So the point of that is basically, as you try to get into modeling more and more things that uses second order, third order, fourth order, like those become more important, you're going to need to be much more fine-tuned in your initial assumptions, which every model has, right? They have these input variables. The less you are like accurate in those, the non-linear like the result, like significantly. Yeah. So your intuition is correct in the sense that now, when you are not suppressing, the second order becomes more significant. And when the second order becomes more significant, the third order becomes more significant, right? Like basically if the hospitals get overwhelmed, then people have to stay in lockdown more, meaning the economy gets hit more, and then that hits more and that hits more. So like, maybe it's like plus or minus 1 trillion in the first order, but like it could be plus or minus even 100 trillion, right? Like actually, I think he says something about like suppression or something will cost 3 trillion. I think we've already spent like basically 3 trillion. We've been putting all this money into what's called the repo market and stuff like that. And I literally think we've spent 3 trillion already. So, the first order is already kind of possibly wrong there. So like, but basically your intuition is right there.
Yeah. So everyone, again, I feel like, people are kind of applying a naive Bayesian, or, one of my friends who's really being extremely stupid about this is an engineer. And it seems to me
It's
like
typical.
he's thinking like an engineer about an ecological problem, right?
Yep.
And it's like they expect their tolerances to be extremely fine and then to be able to have linear models. And if you don't have that, then you can't engineer shit, right? You don't act with the kind of uncertainties that you have to act with in these cases. So engineering is a wonderful tool set to think about certain types of problems. But as far as I can tell, and I'm not an engineer or an ecologist or epidemiologist, as far as I can tell, it's a misleading set of priors to try to apply to this type of situation.
Yeah, so I'll say one thing. For modeling, you don't need to, as an engineer or as a Bayesian, you don't have to choose a linear model. You can choose an exponential model. You can choose whatever type model, fat-tailed. The problem becomes that if you don't know the exact model, or if you do know the model, but you don't know the assumptions well enough, the error bar will be high. If you don't know the model or the distribution, then the error bar is ridiculously high. So let's say he's trying to model like even influenza. If his assumptions are inaccurate just by a little bit, the sensitivity error from the results will be enormous, and that will be the gray swan kind of margin of error. And in this case, he could again also choose not to use the linear model, and he doesn't even know what the distribution is, right? So like this is typical amongst engineers. I find out I'm a software engineer, a former software engineer myself, and I run kind of one of these a chat amongst some Googlers that I still know in the past. One of them loves to model, and like his models right now is an exponential model, and he's constantly updating it. He's a Bayesian, and it's like my one friend keeps telling him that like there are all these factors that can change a model completely. Like for example, if you do a lockdown, that changes the model completely, right? There's just too many variables at play, and the sensitivity error is too great for an unknown multiplicative distribution that like acting as a Bayesian in this thing where you're trying to acquire data before you make a decision is it's too dangerous, in my opinion.
Yeah, so you don't want to wait until the bear's biting you.
Yeah, and not only that, like, so yeah, one, you definitely don't want to wait till the bear for the stone, right? Like, the risk runs faster than your data collection. The second is your data collection even accurate? Like, for example, say someone believes they got all the data correctly, and they model it, like, and then they go like, this is what we should do. Like, this is the way it works, right? I think like the UK was kind of going off that, and then it's like, we can just do herd immunity, we'll be fine. And it's like, shit, actually we have one of the variables incorrect. Like, no, this will actually destroy us.
Dying, yeah.
Yeah.
So, one of the big things here is so there's the second order effects of the virus, and then there's the second order effects to the economy, or all the effects to the economy that come from however we act towards the virus, right?
Right.
A lot of the people who are skeptical about this, basically they're prioritizing the economy. But if we had listened to Taleb in January, we would already have avoided a massive amount of damage to the economy, as far as I can tell. And like, I started thinking about this because, I had a lot of money on the line that I lost because I'm not going to be able to hold events. So I was like thinking, okay, this is happening, I gotta get up on it. But like, there's this huge hesitation to go ahead and put the obvious into action because it costs money. But then I had this realization, which was that the earlier we act, the less money is cost over the time span of the thing.
Yes.
So it's like, do I want to lose, $30,000 today or $100,000 over the next 7 months?
Right. Yeah. So like this, have you heard of prospect theory?
I haven't.
So basically people seem to have this tendency to they'll be okay with small losses. They'll be okay with small wins and then a huge loss over small losses and then a huge win. So people don't want to take the pain. They want to defer as much as possible, even if they know that there's going to be a giant pain later, or like that there's a possibility of a giant pain later.
Yeah.
Like obviously, if they know 100% there's a giant pain later, they won't take it. Well, there's some people that might. The point is, that's kind of what's happening with like even the airlines now. Like if they rather keep their planes running, which they still are. Like I actually have this. Maybe you could share in the show notes, but I actually have another one I was going to post today where you can see what China's look like, and you can count how many planes are in the sky. And the US has like thousands of planes still in the sky, right? Like if they know, even if they knew that there's a possibility that if everyone works together and locks down, their industry will survive much better because it could just be like a 20-day halt, right? Or something like that, versus like 6-month halt, which they definitely don't have the runway for cash to survive that because they have debts to pay, right? They'll still take the 6-month one just because it's like, I can keep the planes running now and keep my money flowing in. Just like you were saying, like it's hard to like take, like to be like, I'm going to take the loss. Like one of the hardest things to do in trading for people is when you've bought an asset, you don't want to let it go because you don't want to admit that like this, take the pain, right? Even though maybe the smart thing to do. So like people have that sort of like wanting to defer the pain. And I think that's kind of like what's in the minds of a lot of these government and corporations. They don't want to sacrifice now, even though there's the possibility that the sacrifice later will be significantly higher, significantly, like unmeasurably higher.
There's I know you're not a huge fan of psychological research, but there's a similar concept in psychology called time preference. Are you aware of that?
I've heard of time preference, yeah.
So, I mean, the basic idea is that, and there's some truth to this, that something now is more valuable, or it's also called delay discounting, right? So if I give you, if I can give you $10,000 today versus, $30,000 in 3 years, the $10,000 to you today is probably worth more than the $30,000 in 3 years because you can take that money and do something with it, and you can probably get a better gain on it, right? So in that sense, delay discounting, you would discount that time because it actually, that time is time that you can grow that money, right? But if you discount, if you take the $10,000 today and not 30,000 in 3 days, right? That would be an inappropriate delay.
Yeah.
So there is value to the time at which something happens.
Right.
But most people psychologically are set up so that they discount things in the future more than is certainly optimal for the future version of themselves.
I see.
Right. So one of the biggest predictors in psychology, and it's probably not useful to go into whether this is actually predictive, but to the degree that it's been found predictive of success is your ability to delay discount at a young age, right? This is the classic marshmallow test, right? If I'm going to leave you in a room with a marshmallow and you're 4 years old and say,
I've heard of this one.
5 minutes, when I come back, I'll give you 2 marshmallows.
Right.
So response to that's highly predictive, to the degree that psychological models are predictive.
Right. Caveat there, of course.
Yeah. So it's basically the same thing, right? And so we do have uncertainty about the future, right? So like, will I even be alive, right? Or will my business survive, right? To that point where that future gain could exist. And the other thing is it's uncertainty as in, lack of confidence that the thing is going to happen.
Right.
One thing that I notice internally with myself is I can reach a rational model in my mind, and that it takes some time before that rational model is actually felt.
Right.
And a lot of time, we don't really take action a lot of the time because we think something. We don't take action until we feel something about it.
Right. This is common in trading. So like Taleb talked about this in I think Black Swan. I forget. Maybe flip around this. There's this guy named George Soros who's just very good at just being like, all right, this trade didn't go the way I planned. Cut it loose, right? And he says one possible narrative could be that I think it's the amygdala, like it kind of controls your like ability to just be like, yeah, I don't care, versus like, oh, I'm gonna hold on to this, right? And typically Taleb was saying a narrative could be that this is an evolutionary like thing we want, which is we want to hold on to something because that'll help us maybe procreate, etc. Whereas the one that just like drops off and says, peace, like I'm cool. I don't care about that. Like kid, I don't care about, taking care of that kid, whatever, right? Like then you may not procreate as much. So like it's probably rare to find people that are okay with just like, all right, well, sunk cost, I'm done. A lot of people typically as traders, and myself included, will be like, oh, I kind of want to hold on to this. And it's not just trading. I'm saying like obviously applies in your sense with your business as well, right?
Yeah.
And so like there are types of, and this is kind of going off on the weeds a little bit, but like this is kind of why I prefer to do what's called options trading, where it's easy. You kind of take the loss in the beginning. You kind of, when you enter a trade, it's basically like I already accepted the loss.
Yeah.
And I'm just going for the gain. So then you don't need to worry about getting out of it. And you can actually use options as insurance. So like, for example, if you're not positive what's going to happen with this virus, let's say, but let's say you want to pay some insurance so that if this virus goes bad, you'll make money to cover the losses for your business or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's essentially what options can do for you. It's like a way to hedge against some uncertainty. And typically what happens during, when the uncertainty actually unfolds, when the hurricane actually happens, insurance will rise. So during an incident, insurance is very expensive, but before the incident, insurance is quite cheap. So like if you very early on, look at this thing, it's in Wuhan, it hasn't spread anywhere, and you're like, I'm going to buy the insurance because I know that I can resell the insurance for much more if the event happens. If the event doesn't happen, I lost a little bit of money.
Yeah.
You see?
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. So one thing I wanted to touch on before we finish is normalcy bias. So this is, I think, like
that's actually what I want to touch on too. Perfect.
Looking at my own response to it as well. Like there's an attachment to there's an attachment to the money and the event happening and all of that. There's also attachment just like, or what it felt like to me is literally like an inability to let the world change, right?
Yes.
It's I know intellectually that this is going to happen, but it's like emotionally I'm grasping onto my normal.
Yes.
And I think that I think a lot of people, if they recognize the power of this bias, it would help them think much more rationally about what's happening.
I very much agree. Yeah. So this is what I've been trying to fight for very recently, because I think we need to take action. So effectively, even in like the wake of danger right in front of your face, if no one else is acting, it seems people still don't act. We've seen this with Titanic. If you wiki normalcy bias, you'll see like many examples. Another one was Pompeii. Like people just don't act. And one of the most important things in like preparedness that we know is getting people just prepared because they're not going to act themselves. So like, I think there's two problems in this, at least what I've seen with COVID-19. One is the government keeps saying it's low risk, which doesn't put people into action because the people are just like, oh, well, if it's low risk and, they're not told to do something, they're not going to do anything, right? And then secondly, you have people, a lot of people are now starting to come over to the side of realizing that it's dangerous, right? Maybe not like a few weeks ago, but I have tons of friends now going like, Eric, you were right? but there's still this crowd of people where they like some reason they need to keep their mind like saying that this is not happening. So they spread like what you alluded to in the beginning, hopium news, which is like kind of like this irrational hope to try to like, remove the thought of like this is really bad. And then, maybe as an individual, like they won't have too much impact on the ecological system, but they spread this news on social media, which then becomes viral. And I've seen one of those copy paste messages that people, spread virally on like hopium news that like some of them even fake news, right? Some of them not. But like, I don't think we should be spreading any hopium news because of the fact that we need to actually spread, if anything, we need to spread fake news that says this is worse than it is, because people are not going to act. So like, if we know people aren't going to act unless like you tell them like it's not an iceberg that's going to hit the Titanic, you tell them that it's a nuclear bomb that's going to hit the Titanic, at least they'll do something, right?
Yeah.
By spreading hopium news, you're only exacerbating the normalcy bias. You're telling people, hey, don't worry about it. No one's going to lock down. And this becomes like exponentially worse than it is, to the point where like, financially this has helped me, but like, I don't want this to keep helping me. Like I'm cool with, I want this to, we just bought a new house. We want to be able to invite our friends over, but we haven't interacted socially with anyone for like 3 weeks now. Like I'm worried for my parents, right? Like this things that like this is gonna impact everyone a lot. Like where the unemployment rate is gonna rise so much too.
Like I wish people would just look at what's happening in Italy, right?
Yes, that's a great example.
Find someone to talk to who's in Italy, because on March 1st, 34 people had died in Italy. Yesterday, 793 people died in Italy. Right? That's 3 weeks.
Right.
Right? We're basically 2 weeks behind that. Now, Italy, there's various reasons why Italy might be a worst case scenario. And
actually, our growth rate of cases is going
growth rate
faster.
of cases is worse. Our mortality rate may not be as bad. We don't know. Like there are other places where they're getting similar numbers of cases, but not having as many deaths. But maybe this is hopium. Maybe like what we should be prepared for is that it will be as bad or worse than Italy.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's how you should be thinking. Like it's going to be much worse than Italy.
Yeah. And so you need to go and you need to read the news of what's happening in Italy, or talk to somebody in Italy and get a felt experience of what it's like being in a place where the hospitals are filled and the soccer fields are turned into hospitals, and every doctor and nurse that is isolated from their family and has been working 18 hours a day or 20 hours a day for the last 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And they have people dying on their tables every damn day, right? People, you see all these people are like, oh, this is panic, but it's like panic. I think that the government has trained us to have this idea that panic is bad.
I know, right?
Like we have this idea that panic is bad, and it's like fear. Like people talk to me about, like someone posted this on those, like, don't buy into the fear, man. It's like, no. Like, I don't know. You may have read a book called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. It's very important in self-defense circles. Fear exists for a reason. We evolved to have fear. Now, yes. I don't feel panicky. I don't feel super anxious or anything.
Right.
I do feel concerned, right? And like we need to take action. And those are not the same thing. In a panic situation, you start doing irrational things, like buying all of the toilet paper. Right? Sure, we want to avoid that. But what we need to achieve is to get to people to act prudently.
Right.
And if you want 80%, 90% of the population to act prudently, then 10, 15% are going to panic.
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
But that's much better than having 80% of the population being foolhardy.
Yep. I mean, I basically think of it as almost binary in a sense. Like people are either going to do nothing or people are either going to do something. And I feel like if we need to get panic out there to people, even if it's like a certain amount will just do stupid shit like buy toilet paper, like most people won't be, doing crazy stuff. Like essentially like people seem to have this like cinema view of people running around rioting and throwing Molotov cocktails, right? Like that's not going to happen in the beginning of preparing for this. When that is going to happen is when we prepare too late and everyone's unemployed and everyone has no money and everyone is desperate for food. At those points in time, you will see crime rise. At those points in time, it becomes a way more dangerous scenario because that type of panic is mass panic due to desperation. Whereas the current type of panic that I'm asking for right now is more prudent panic, like you're saying, with the possibility of some people doing crazy stuff, but it's not out of desperation yet, right?
Here's a good example, right? Like I'm a self-defense, that's something I'm super interested in. So imagine that someone comes into the room and you get a feeling right away that something is weird with them, right? Now, if you tell yourself, oh, don't be afraid, that's irrational, right? And you don't react to the signal that person's sending. And then maybe they get really close to you and, they're yelling in your face, but you're like, oh, this is going to blow over. Then pretty soon they're assaulting you. Right? Now, you're going to panic when a larger, stronger person with a weapon is stabbing you.
Right.
Your actions are unlikely to be very effective.
Right.
You listen to that first inkling of fear. You don't have to panic, right? You can get up, make sure that you have opportunities to exit. You can have your hands in front of you with lots of space to make sure that person can't come into your bubble.
Exactly.
This is what we're advocating for. This is what's been advocated for since January by the people smart about this.
Exactly.
Start being aware and preparing as if this might be the guy who's going to assault you. Don't wait till he's got the knife in your ribs.
At that point, you're too late. That panic is not going to be too useful at that point.
Exactly. And how do people panic when they do that? Right? Generally, extremely violently and ineffectively.
That's when the Molotov cocktail comes out.
Exactly. You have to act. You don't have a good model for action, and you're emotionally overwhelmed. You might survive because of that, but your likelihood of things going well is bad.
Right. It's actually so a few friends have asked me, like, how do I deal with the anxiety of having to, accept that this is the case, right? And preparing for whatever. And I have trouble thinking of a great answer for it. And I think I have one now. And basically, we're all like, a lot of people now are stocking up, staying home, stuff like that. I think that kind of message has, maybe not people in Miami Beach, but like, that message is starting to be broadcast. And you start feeling, people look down upon you if you're not one of those people, right? So like you feel that shame. So you feel like almost like the new normalcy bias is to stay home, right? So I think that's fine, somewhat.
Man,
I think the danger. I think to deal with that anxiety that people are feeling now, like one way you could do it is make the awareness more broad, so that the people on Miami Beach won't be there. Like you can take action. You can, bash social media posts that are like saying, "Oh, this is hopium," or you can make people more aware and like that responsibility in yourself. If you can get like 700 other people, like I usually get like 20, 30 messages a day from my posts and stories now from different strangers every day. And like, to me, if I added that up, that might be like, I might have impacted like 400 or 500 people. Those people are spreading the message and they impact, like that creates impact. And like, we need that to bubble to the top. But even if it doesn't, at least if it doesn't bubble to the top, we've gotten people to stay home more broadly, so that we can, have enough testing and enough hospital capacity to handle the additional load that comes from the people that aren't staying home, right?
Yeah.
If that's what I've been telling people, like, just
action.
Take action. Yeah, like don't just sit around and let the analysis of the situation try to fix it with hopium by sitting down and doing nothing. Just accept it and take action, and it'll actually feel rewarding too.
Yeah. So I know you're not a big fan of Jordan Peterson, but that was one of the big things that helped me turn the corner on this. Is because it basically has this model of like you essentially, in his model, you're living your prosaic life. Like life is basically a motivational frame arises. You play out a sequence of generally routines, and then you fulfill that motivational frame. That's, you know, so I'm hungry, right? I walk to the kitchen, I throw some bacon on the thing, I cook the bacon, I eat. Motivational frame ended. Not an interesting story. Nobody cares, right? All the great stories are stories where that doesn't happen, right? I go to the kitchen, I start to cook bacon, and you know, there's a grease fire, and, and then I have to do something to fix things, right? So that's anomaly. There's an anomaly that happens. There's basically two paths when you experience anomaly. One is to proactively engage it. And when you proactively engage anomaly, then you're able to, you know, sometimes it kills you anyways, but your best chance to deal with it is to proactively engage it.
Right.
And anomalies grow the longer that you leave them alone.
Right.
This is his analysis of like the dragon story is, right? Go to the dragon and then you can get the gold. If you let the dragon come to you, you get smashed, right? Another way to think about this is that you're neurohormonally set up this way, that if you put yourself in a situation that's challenging, if you chose to be in that challenging situation, you get an emotional reward from it. Right. If the anomaly happens to you and you're not choosing to do it and you're continually pulling back from it, it's more and more anxiety producing.
Right.
So this is the same thing for me. This is how I approach this problem. It was like, okay, I can see there's a dragon on the horizon. I can bury my head in the sand and things are only going to get worse. Or I can try to address it. First of all, say it's there. And then I can start thinking of all the ways that I can actually start to find, you know, some way to gain from the situation rather than just being crushed by it.
Right. Instead of crushed by anxiety, you're actually helping save lives and feeling rewarded and recognizing that there is a dragon in front of you.
Yeah. So that's been my approach to it is approaching the problem actually reduces anxiety over time.
I hope that helps with other people with anxiety. Like, cause I personally, I'm not feeling anxiety about it. Maybe because I've been prepared all along and stuff. I'm worried for my parents, obviously, but it's not, you know, manifesting itself physiologically. But like, if this can help other people with their anxiety, then we only get a societal benefit, because if people can spread the word to other people and prevent the negative news, in my opinion, of opium, then we get an individual benefit of removed anxiety and a societal benefit of less, you know, second or third or fourth order effects.
Yeah. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that that the world is always going to be the normal prosaic world that you think it is. Yeah. Be prepared for anomalies to occur,
right,
and be ready to forthrightly confront them.
Otherwise, you'd be normalcy biased all over again.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what people are, you know, if we, you know, combine these two frames, you can see that essentially, you know, when, you know, another example that you could use is you're in a relationship with a partner, right? And there's certain routines, and then all of a sudden, somehow those routines aren't happening normally. Right? So maybe your partner isn't coming home at the normal hour, and they're calling you, say, "I'm late for work. I'm late. I have to work late. I have to work." So this is a signal.
I see where this is going.
Now, you can pretend, right? You can say, no, this is going to be normal. No, this is going to be normal. This is just blah, 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 right? That's normalcy bias, right? If you forthrightly confront the problem now, you know, then maybe they admit that they have an attraction to someone at the office and they had a drink afterwards, and your marriage doesn't end because they've actually been having a 3-month affair.
Right. An interesting, keep going.
So many people are talking about panic, right? But it's like, when you're thinking about fear, it's not like it's only a problem in one direction, right? Too little fear is just as bad as too much fear.
Right,
In some situations, it's much worse.
right.
But the thing about fear, from my perspective as a teacher of movement, is you never want to get rid of fear, right? If you get rid of fear completely, you set yourself up to die very quickly.
You're turning off the alarm.
Yeah. What you want is to not let fear drive behavior without regard to your other systems.
Right, right,
Panic is when the only thing that's driving you is fear.
right.
The earlier you react, the earlier that you recognize the thing that is fearful, the better you can integrate it with your rational system. And then you don't have to go through so much anxiety, right? You're not highly anxious right now because you panicked early. I mean, panic is the wrong word for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's like a semantic to this. Like, it seems like panic has different connotations to different people. The ones that hate it think of the Molotov cocktails and think where fear is the only driving factor. The ones that say that we should panic early are like you and me, where it's like, use that fear to drive action, positively, so you can, do something about it. That most people will be like, why are you doing this? That's at least what I'm considering panic. I'm considering, like, you see the fear, you see the unknown that's very dangerous, and you take action, and other people are going to look at you and be like, why are you doing this? It seems stupid. Like, I bought a mask on January 20th or something like that. Before it was like 400 cases in Wuhan. People probably wondering, like, why did you do that? Well, it seems like you're panicking.
How a mask cost?
Now, I don't know. Back then, it was like $20 or something. I bought I bought disposable N95 masks, which I may donate. I'm not sure. And then I also have a P100 mask with like filters that look like Bane from Batman. I have goggles, I have gloves, I have all that. I got all that really early, right? So I never got into one where I know they're all sold out now. I also got them from my parents. But like, it's, people might question why you're doing that, but it's not like violent or Molotov cocktails or just like purely fear driven. It's more like, okay, I see some danger, so I'm going to do things that may seem like you don't need to do this. It's more like, why are you doing something you don't need to do right now? Yeah, that's what I consider good panic early. That's and I think that's what most people do, to be honest. They're not going to throw Molotov cocktails until, like,
Yeah. But you're buying insurance, basically.
Exactly. I'm buying insurance, and it's cheap now.
It was cheap then.
It was cheap then. Yeah. Now, if you want to get an N95 mask, you may need to go to black market and buy it for like $200.
Not only that, you have to consider the second order effects of trying to get those masks.
Yeah, if you get it from black market, it may not actually be N95.
So I actually have to jump on another call right now, but this is a really good conversation. Thanks for
sure.
joining me again, Eric, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
I'm sure we will.
Talk soon. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Evolve, Move, Play podcast. If you want to support what we're doing, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notifications button so you know what's coming up. And of course, the biggest support you can give is to become a Patreon supporter. This is what's going to allow us to grow this platform more than anything else. So this is entirely listener supported, and we really appreciate your support. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.